October 28th, 3:42 a.m. Maria Santos was driving the mountain road to Blue Mountain Peak when she heard what sounded like thunder that wouldn't stop. The whole mountainside just started moving, she later told rescue teams, her voice shaking. Trees the size of buildings were tumbling like matchsticks. I watched an entire hillside fold in on itself, like someone pulled a carpet out from under it. What Maria witnessed wasn't an isolated event. Across Jamaica's Blue Mountains, Haiti's Massif du Nord, and the Dominican Republic's Cordillera Central, Hurricane Melissa's 185 miles per hour winds and record rainfall were triggering something that defied every geological model, synchronized mountain collapses happening in perfect sequence, like dominoes falling across 3 entire countries. Because when researchers analyzed satellite data from that terrifying night, they discovered Melissa hadn't just caused random landslides. The storm had triggered a coordinated chain reaction where each collapsing slope destabilized the next, creating what geologists are calling cascade slope failure, a phenomenon that could reshape entire mountain ranges in hours. The question keeping disaster specialists awake: if one hurricane can trigger more than 50 landslides in sequence, what happens when the next major storm hits mountains already weakened by Melissa's geological massacre? Hurricane Melissa's formation began innocuously enough, a tropical depression forming over superheated Caribbean waters on October the 21st, 2025. But what followed was anything but normal. Within 72 hours, Melissa underwent explosive intensification, morphing from a moderate tropical storm into the most devastating Category 5 hurricane to ever make landfall in Jamaica. By October 27th, Melissa had achieved sustained winds of 185 miles per hour, with gusts reaching a catastrophic 200 miles per hour in mountainous regions. The central pressure plummeted to an astonishing 892 millibars, only the second Atlantic hurricane in history to drop below 900. But it wasn't just Melissa's wind strength that made it unprecedented. The hurricane moved with agonizing slowness, less than 5 miles per hour, essentially parking itself over the Caribbean's most vulnerable mountain ranges for nearly 18 hours. This prolonged assault allowed Melissa to dump between 25 and 30 inches of rainfall per hour in some locations, 5 times the precipitation rate of a typical major hurricane. For comparison, Hurricane Maria in 2017, which devastated Puerto Rico, produced roughly 5 to 6 inches of rain per hour at its peak. Melissa's rainfall was quite literally off the charts, overwhelming soil structures that had remained stable for centuries. Dr. Eliza Montenegro, lead meteorologist at the Caribbean Hurricane Center, explains, "When we saw Melissa's rainfall numbers, we initially thought our equipment was malfunctioning. No hurricane in recorded Caribbean history has produced this level of sustained precipitation. The mountains were essentially subjected to a continuous waterfall from the sky for almost a full day. But Melissa's path proved especially devastating because of where it struck. Unlike previous Category 5 storms, which often swept through a single island nation, Melissa carved a diagonal path across 3 countries' mountain ranges, starting in Jamaica's Blue Mountains, then raking across Haiti's deforested Massif du Nord, before finally battering the Dominican Republic's Cordillera Central. All 3 mountain systems share critical geological vulnerabilities: steep slopes, fractured bedrock, and years of human deforestation that had already weakened natural slope stability. Melissa essentially exploited every weakness in the Caribbean's geological armour. The hurricane's diagonal trajectory meant it delivered its most intense eastern eyewall, where the strongest winds and heaviest rainfall concentrate directly into the windward faces of each mountain range in sequence. This wasn't just bad luck, it was the worst possible storm track for triggering the catastrophic chain reaction that followed. Maria Santos wasn't supposed to be on Blue Mountain Peak Road that morning. The 42-year-old coffee farmer had evacuated her family days earlier, but returned alone to secure equipment at their high-altitude plantation when evacuation orders came. "I never made it to our farm," she recounts from her hospital bed, her left leg in a cast. About halfway up, I heard this sound, like dozens of freight trains all at once. Then the road in front of me just disappeared. What saved Maria's life was pure instinct. She reversed her truck just seconds before the entire mountainside collapsed, burying the road under 80 feet of debris. Her truck was struck by flying rock fragments, shattering her windows and breaking her leg, but she managed to navigate down the remaining road to safety. Helicopter footage captured hours later shows the true scale of what Maria escaped. A massive 300-acre section of mountainside had detached completely, taking with it centuries-old trees, boulders the size of houses, and thousands of tons of soil, all flowing downhill at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour. But why did these mountains fail so catastrophically? The answer lies in a perfect storm of vulnerabilities decades in the making. Dr. Robert Chen, lead geologist at the Pacific Disaster Center, had been warning about Caribbean slope instability for years. These mountain ranges were essentially primed for failure. Decades of deforestation had already removed natural root systems that anchor soil layers. When you combine that with fractured bedrock geology and extreme rainfall, you create what we call hydraulic mountain failure. Essentially, the mountains become saturated sponges with nowhere to drain. The process works like this. Extreme rainfall penetrates deep into mountainsides, finding its way into natural fractures and fissures in the bedrock. As water accumulates, it dramatically increases weight while simultaneously reducing friction between different geological layers, essentially creating slippery interfaces between rock and soil. In normal circumstances, mountains have natural drainage systems that prevent this kind of saturation. But Melissa's unprecedented rainfall overwhelmed these systems completely. Water pressure built up inside the mountains until entire slope faces began to detach from their bedrock foundations. What made the situation truly unprecedented was the scale and timing of these failures. Real-time seismic monitoring stations, operated by the Caribbean Geological Survey, detected something remarkable. The initial landslides weren't random. They followed a clear sequence, starting at the highest elevations and progressing downward in perfect synchronization. What we were seeing was essentially geological dominoes, explains Dr. Chen. Each major landslide created seismic waves, small earthquake-like tremors that traveled through the already saturated mountains. When these waves reached adjacent slopes that were already at their tipping point, they acted as triggering mechanisms, essentially providing the final push needed to overcome the remaining friction holding these slopes in place. It's similar to how someone might push a heavy boulder balanced on the edge of a cliff, explains Dr. Chen. The rainfall had already moved these mountain slopes to their failure threshold, and the seismic energy provided the final nudge. What made this process truly devastating was its radius of influence. Analysis of satellite imagery and seismic data revealed that each major landslide could trigger subsequent failures up to 40 miles away, a previously unimaginable distance for landslide chain reactions. The sequence progressed with horrifying efficiency. Within 3 hours of the initial failure, more than 50 major landslides had occurred across 3 mountain ranges in 3 different countries, each triggered by its predecessors in a cascading sequence that defied all previous geological models. Satellite imagery from before and after Melissa tells the devastating story. Entire valleys that existed for thousands of years were completely filled with debris. Mountain ridgelines were transformed beyond recognition, with some peaks losing over 100 meters of elevation. In the hardest hit regions of Haiti's Massif du Nord, nearly 40% of the landscape was physically altered. The underground consequences were equally severe. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the aftermath revealed extensive networks of new fractures extending hundreds of meters below the surface, far deeper than typical landslide impacts. These fracture networks now serve as potential failure planes for future landslides, making the affected regions exponentially more vulnerable to the next major storm. Perhaps most concerning is the ongoing nature of this catastrophe. 2 weeks after Melissa passed, mountainsides continue to collapse daily, some without any additional rainfall. The chain reaction has created a new geological reality where mountains previously considered stable for thousands of years now sit in precarious balance, waiting for the slightest disturbance to trigger the next failure. Dawn breaks over the Artibonite Valley in Haiti, revealing a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Where verdant mountains once stood, now gaping scars of exposed rock stretch for miles. In the valleys below, entire villages lie buried under millions of tons of rock and soil. But perhaps most disturbing is what's happening in real time, visible through the telescopic lens of our camera, positioned on a stable ridge across the valley. A massive section of mountainside is visibly moving, not rapidly like a traditional landslide, but slowly, inexorably like a glacier of rock and earth, descending millimeter by millimeter. What you're witnessing is the aftermath of cascade slope failure, explains Dr. Marcia Ramirez, geological engineer specializing in slope stability. These mountains aren't just damaged, they're fundamentally destabilized at a structural level. Some will continue moving for years, possibly decades. 3 weeks after Melissa's passage, emergency evacuations continue across all 3 affected countries. Entire communities that survived the initial hurricane are now being abandoned due to the threat of ongoing landslides. Real-time monitoring using ground-penetrating radar has identified over 300 mountain slopes, now classified as critically unstable, many of which show continuous movement even without additional rainfall. The scale of displacement is unprecedented in modern history. Over 125,000 people have been permanently displaced from mountain communities that are now deemed uninhabitable. The economic impact is equally devastating, with agricultural losses exceeding $2.3 billion as coffee plantations. Fruit orchards and subsistence farms vanish under landslide debris. But the most alarming aspect of this ongoing disaster is what it reveals about future vulnerability. Climate models consistently project Caribbean hurricanes will continue intensifying as ocean temperatures rise, with Category 5 storms becoming increasingly common. Meanwhile, the region's mountains now sit in a fundamentally weakened state, with new fracture networks and unstable slopes created by Melissa's cascade failures. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, climate scientist at the Earth Systems Research Laboratory, doesn't mince words about the implications. What we're witnessing is a fundamental reset of our understanding of mountain stability in a changing climate. Mountains we've considered permanent fixtures of our landscape for centuries can now fail catastrophically in hours under the right conditions. Ground-penetrating radar surveys reveal the extent of this new vulnerability. Beneath seemingly intact mountain slopes, extensive networks of new fractures now extend hundreds of meters into the bedrock, essentially creating pre-formed failure planes waiting to be activated by the next major rainfall event. This creates a frightening new reality for disaster planning. Areas previously considered safe, often located miles from obvious landslide zones, may now face unexpected threats due to the extended radius of cascade failure effects. Evacuation zones need complete recalculation, and infrastructure previously built to withstand traditional landslide threats may be wholly inadequate against this new phenomenon. Perhaps most concerning is how this vulnerability extends beyond the Caribbean. Geological surveys of mountain ranges across Central America, the Pacific Northwest, and Southeast Asia reveal similar combinations of steep topography, fractured bedrock, and increased rainfall intensity from climate change, all ingredients that could potentially trigger similar cascade failures worldwide. The mountains we've built our civilizations around, trusted as eternal anchors of stability in our landscapes, have revealed a new fragility in the face of our changing climate. The question facing geologists, disaster planners, and vulnerable communities isn't if more cascade failures will occur, But when and how we'll adapt to this new geological reality? Because in a world where mountains themselves can collapse in coordinated sequence, our fundamental assumptions about landscape stability, and the human settlements built upon that stability, may require complete reconsideration. Mountains are falling in chain reactions across our planet, and we've only witnessed the beginning. Subscribe to Earth Attacks for exclusive updates as scientists race to predict the next Cascade slope failure. Join us to witness nature's most terrifying geological revolution unfolding in real time, before the next hurricane triggers catastrophe at an even larger scale. Now, scientists and planners face an urgent task: redraw hazard maps and rethink what safe means for mountain communities. Existing risk zones, based on historical rainfall and slope behaviour, no longer capture the new reality of synchronised slope failures under extreme storms. Models must incorporate saturated bedrock dynamics, long-range seismic triggering, and the expanded radius of influence observed after the storm. That requires dense monitoring networks, updated satellite change detection, and community-level relocation plans tied to dynamic hazard thresholds. International aid and insurance systems will need revised exposure estimates that account for multi-slope collapse scenarios. Ultimately, adaptation demands humility. Engineering solutions and zoning must assume mountains can fail in hours, not centuries, and policies must prioritise preemptive evacuation, landscape restoration, and long-term support for displaced populations.